With the release of Secret of the Mimic, FNAF finally turns its focus to the 1970s, teasing a glimpse at the early years of Fazbear Entertainment. However, rather than giving us a direct look at Fazbear, the game takes place at the business of a Fazbear contractor, Edwin Murray. Edwin's an inventor whose story provides insight into some of the franchise's deeper mysteries. Conveyed entirely through memos, voice logs, and scattered environmental clues, Secret of the Mimic's plot asks players to piece together Edwin's story on their own. And it can be easy to miss the nuance of how profound and devastating that story is. Because in the end, the true secret of the Mimic might not even be the robot itself, but the story of its father and his descent into ruin. This one will probably be a long one, so make sure you're settled in and comfortable, and we'll get started. I'm Cthulhu's with Perseid Labs, and as always, this video couldn't have happened without my lovely wife, Shockburn. The Edwin Murray that we meet in The Secret of the Mimic is not the same man who appears in the Tales for the Pizzaplex. While both share a core tragedy, the loss of a family and the creation of a mimicry-capable machine, the timeline, context and characterisation diverge significantly. Book Edwin is a tragic recluse, haunted by his grief and only marginally connected to the early story of Fazbear. He's always been independent and a self-made businessman who works and lives alone with his child in a derelict factory, where his pain turns inward. His mimic becomes a victim of his helpless rage, and though we witness the consequences of his action 30 years later, vast chunks of time are still missing from his story. Game Edwin, by contrast, is embedded in a working ecosystem. He has a staff, a child, a spouse, and an entire inherited corporate history. After the loss of his wife, he builds M1 out of sheer desperation and then allows it to become his surrogate wife, friend and co-parent. His story is about delusion as much as grief. Where Book Edwin is difficult to pin down, Game Edwin is painfully present in the environment that we explore. We hear the trajectory of his time in charge of MCM in voice memos, trace his decision and their impacts in the mails that we find, and walk through the ruins of basically everything that he built. His arc becomes a reflection not just of personal failure, but a man central to Fazbear's creation who's destroyed by loss, a hostile corporate takeover, and dangerous supernatural forces. Both Edwins are tragic, but only one of them was a core partner with Fazbear, who used the Mimic to try and replace his lost family, with awful results. We first hear about Edwin via the dispatcher's instructions to Arnold. Edwin's dismissively called a contractor, someone developing tech for Fazbear, but they've lost contact with him. According to the dispatcher, everything Edwin was working on is now legally Fazbear's property, and Arnold is just being sent to retrieve it. This interaction immediately tells us a few things. Edwin worked closely with Fazbear, but has since withdrawn. He signed a contract that gave them sweeping control of his creations. He may have been desperate, naive, or both. In The Mimic, the short story, we see something similar. Book Edwin signs a buyout contract but loses his original company and intellectual property. He signed over his entire business, which wasn't animatronic focused, just a collection of disparate inventions like his vacuum system. After the sale, he's forced to build entertainment characters for the company, useless work that he completely hates doing. When he comes back to Fazbear 30 years later, he has a high salary and a board position from the buyout. In the game, whether Fazbear has the right to Edwin's work is ambiguous. He's pushed to bankruptcy over a bad contract with people that he believed were his friends. In the modern day, Edwin and Fiona's designs are intrinsic to Fazbear, for the mascots to the tech. He was one of the original visionaries who was partners and friends with Henry and William. But he ends up reduced to the role of contractor, and Edwin and Fiona are ultimately almost entirely erased from Fazbear history. Our first direct contact with Edwin in the game comes when we reach Murray's costume manor. At the entrance, a recorded message of Edwin's voice tells us the facility is temporarily closed, and cheerfully directs us to the client and deliveries entrance at the side. His tone is polite, but it has the artificial cheer of someone trying very firmly to project stability. The loading entrance has long been bricked up, and the side of the factory is strewn with abandoned merchandise. Walking towards the client entrance that he mentioned, we pass a faded outdoor play area where a rusted slide and a ball resting beside it. For players familiar with Tales for the Pizzaplex, the ball's presence is ominous. Edwin's son David chases a ball into traffic and is killed in that story. Without needing to say a word, the game implies this was David's play area, and that whatever happened here wasn't good. The moment with the slide is also a nod to fandom culture in its way. Steel Wool knows their player base, and they're aware that even players who haven't read the short stories might know David's ball from the meme song, Jackie's Box. Even if a player knows absolutely nothing going into the game, we look back to this play area later in the story where it's explained in more detail. The slide functions as a callback for existing fans and foreshadowing for newer returning fans. This moment really sets the stage for the way a lot of the story will be conveyed to the player through rich environmental storytelling. Inside the manor, Arnold encounters the Welcome Show and experiences how Edwin markets his services to his investors and clients. The show's a performance and a pitch, and here we're reminded the company is titled Edwin Murray's Costume Manor. That gives us a clue how Edwin sees himself, not just as a creator, but the front man and the face of his brand. Even Fazbear itself was never named after its founders. The only real comparable ego in the series is William Afton's. Afton, of course, named Afton Robotics after himself when given the freedom to do so and put his stamp on everything around him, even tech that Henry or Edwin made. It's not a flattering point of comparison. Rather than driven entirely by ego though, I think Edwin's choice of name stems from insecurity over arrogance. Edwin's decision to rename his father's business hints at familial intentions and a desire to build something that is his alone. During the welcome pitch, Edwin comes off as awkward and overeager. At one point, he declares MCM are a powerhouse in their industry, before punctuating this with a really awkward little woo at the end. The delivery feels forced. Rather than confidently showcasing his company as a desirable high-value partner, Edwin's first impression is nerdy, desperate, and mildly off-putting. The overall impression is humorous, imagining prospective business clients that are just held captive and bombarded by an unhinged performance and off-key song. The host for the welcome show is Mr. Helpful, a bear ringmaster who looks suspiciously similar to Helpy from FNAF 6. Mr. Helpful is voiced by Edwin himself, even though he's not actually a good voice actor or singer, messing up the notes all over the place in the welcome show. Despite putting on a fairly limited act, Edwin does seem more confident, more gregarious, and more charming through Mr. Helpful. It's not incredibly surprising with what we learn later that Edwin almost feels like he needs permission to be a little bit silly. In the show, and later at information booths, he's joined by his co-host, Mrs. Helpful, a companion character who appears to represent Edwin's wife Fiona. Right away, the game layers in symbolism to their relationship, something which is possible to miss the first time around, but on a new Game Plus might give players pause. During Mr. Helpful's musical number, the spotlight falls on Mrs. Helpful, right by a painted purple serpent smiling at her from a tree branch. This feels like a clear Garden of Eden reference to me. Settings later, the entire performance glitches and breaks down, and doesn't open the door, of course. At this point, players who read the books might have questions about Fiona having an active role in the show at all. Fiona died in childbirth in the books, and is absent like pretty much most of them. But here we have her puppet representation, still singing alongside her husband. Like the play area earlier, this moment does gain deeper explanation as the game unfolds. So, let's discuss Edwin's appearance, as this differs between versions of the character. Oddly enough, the most recognisable depiction of Edwin before the game's release didn't come for the books or the graphic novel at all. It came for the parody song Jackie's Box by Extra Tuna. In that video, Edwin's portrayed as a silhouetted, heavy-set, clean-shaven man wearing glasses and a hat. It's a distinctive look that's become embedded in how many fans visualise him, even though it doesn't actually resemble the descriptions from any official source at that point in time. I suspect this fan image may have influenced his final in-game design, especially the absence of a moustache, which some fans now jokingly mourn. Book Edwin. Edwin was first described in the Tales for the Pizzaplex stories. His primary traits are, he's short, around 5 feet 5 inches. In his 30s he sports a full sandy brown moustache that he's had since senior year at that point. He describes himself as having slanted big blue eyes, while his nemesis describes them as bulging and grey. Notably, he doesn't wear glasses. and even brags that his vision's still 20/20 despite his age and the storyteller. At 64, he has a thick head of long white hair, and along with his moustache grew a short pointed beard that covers his insubstantial jawline and weak chin. Overall, he looks pretty gnomish and a little whimsical. Game Edwin. The game version of Edwin seems to reflect changes in his story, and at least a little of Jackie's box. He's missing his iconic moustache entirely, wearing thick glasses over blue eyes, is neatly groomed with short, tidy dark hair, shown in business portraits looking formally dressed, serious and reserved, almost always wearing a large bow tie, which is featured on the logo for Edwin's company. This version of Edwin is more polished but emotionally closed off. He's presentable but not particularly expressive. Fiona's photos show her smiling and relaxed, genuinely enjoying herself whatever the occasion. One aspect of Game Edwin's appearance which isn't clear is his weight. In many of the original ads we see for his inventions, he's depicted as heavier set, but when we see him in various photos, he's thinner. This does make me wonder if he lost weight when he met Fiona, as she has that very random and a little bit off-putting line in the elevator about eating tofu to lose weight. So let's focus on Edwin's personality from here on out, starting with how the game introduces him. The building itself gives us insight into Edwin's history and creativity. MCM was the site of his upbringing, rise and fall. It's where all his best memories take place, and also the site of where his worst ones take place. This game is fundamentally a character study, with Edwin at its heart. And I think that navigating this element is the most fun part. Every memo, environmental clue and offhand voice note teaches us more about him. A large number of these context clues are work related. Edwin is the definition of a workaholic. From the beginning, Edwin's relationship to his workplace is tainted by his projected arrogance and insecurity. He's obsessive and solitary about his inventions and highly resistant to outside input. We quickly learn that Edwin is a frankly tyrannical boss to work for when he isn't shutting everyone out entirely. These issues appear to only worsen over time. One of the game's core tasks is unpicking the timeline of the Murray's costume manor, from Edwin's early optimism and rebrand to his tightening control and tremendous losses, and finally his dark spiral into paranoia and isolation. Edwin cares more about his inventions than the people around him. He emerges from creating mainly to course correct so he can minimise interruptions and distractions, which includes his responsibilities to his company and family. He takes criticism poorly and reacts with stubborn irritation. He governs with a lack of impartiality, steering with his personal tastes rather than what's good for the company. We see the former when his lawyer warns him not to place David's play area near the loading bay, a decision that proves catastrophic. We see the latter when he dismisses requests to branch out into lucrative business that he personally doesn't like, such as selling sports mascots. Even when Fazbear requests minor design changes, he outright refuses, digging in his heels and claiming the originals are already perfect. Edwin's so stubborn, he won't even correct the spelling mistake in Mycelium Men, justifying it via memo instead. Compromise frankly takes too much time for Edwin, and he doesn't have much faith in the ideas of others to begin with. He believes compliance is loyalty, and feedback is inconvenience and betrayal. We see his real attitude to his employees flash through in the way he talks about the inconvenience of employees in the theatre pre-show introduction. He even goes as far as disparaging difficult puppeteers, despite having married a puppeteer himself. Despite his autocratic tendencies, Edwin constantly blurs the line between professional and personal. He invites employees to dinner parties, thinking he can replicate Fiona's popularity, demands emotional intimacy, and reacts to dissent as if it was a personal attack. He says tellingly,
"My employees, my friends, they keep leaving."
But they aren't friends, they're workers. Even Edwin's relationship with Fiona is a transgression of the professional and personal. He was technically her boss when they met, and he told her as much. In his engagement speech, he defines how long they've known each other from her start date, says she's the most amazing artist and creator he's ever been lucky enough to employ, and that she's the heart of the company. This lack of boundary awareness bleeds into everything. As the company begins to collapse, Edwin isn't able to see the destruction as anything but personal. He begins monitoring behaviour, revoking access, and blaming others. The employees all suffer for this. we witness a conversation in the mail system between two co-workers where one confides, "I'd love to have some place for all of us to talk in private. I feel like the boss man is listening all the time." Edwin is right that there's a wolf at the gate of the company, but he doesn't reach out to the people that could have helped him, including his employees and possibly Henry. At one point, he records,
"Edwin, never forget, they're behind it."
While we never get full confirmation on who they are, it's reasonable to assume that this refers to Fazbear Entertainment, especially given the context of his father's warnings. He might have originally disregarded his father's warnings as some kind of bias against creative types, but changed his mind later. The Fiona AI program seems to have fed his fears. Eventually, Edwin starts locking employees in areas of the building, such as the recycling wing, until their work is complete. This kind of literal entrapment reflects the emotional entrapment that he's always demanded from them. In the meantime, there's an escalation of real physical danger for customers, visitors, employees, Edwin's family, and finally Edwin himself. When Fiona records elevator safety procedures, she implies accidents have already occurred. He delegates that task to her, possibly because he can't handle the emotional gravity of conveying this himself. Once again, she gets delegated his emotional labour. Later, employees express explicit fear, especially as the spring lock designs come into play. "Ralph went to the hospital last night. That suit's going to be the death of one of us. One more injury and I'm out of here. I mean it this time." But when Henry suggests moving away from spring locks, Edwin suggests,
"It would be so much easier to keep using the spring locks. Just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do."
When those around Edwin are injured or afraid, he downplays the danger they're in and doubles down on his course of action. Paranoia tells Edwin they're all out to get him, but Edwin is dangerous, and while he wants all of his friends to like him, he does not have the best interests of those around him at heart. Just a little note here, if my voice sounds a bit different, it's because I had a cold. Edwin is prone to explosive outbursts of anger and frustration when things don't go his way. He struggles to regulate his emotions, and many of his voice logs consist of him yelling, berating others, or venting to himself. He rarely sounds genuinely cheerful unless he's speaking through Mr. Helpful, his performative mascot persona. At his core, Edwin is selfish. He's deeply wrapped up in his tasks and desires, and this detachment leaves no room for genuine empathy. He doesn't cultivate relationships, he demands loyalty instead, and doesn't offer real connection. He expects admiration. We see this dynamic most clearly during the admin department birthday party, or rather the one he forces them to attend. When his son's birthday falls on a weekend, Edwin mandates the entire department shows up and serves as party guests, and it's non-negotiable. Some employees rebel by repeatedly changing the door code. One might even have quit altogether, furious at this last-minute denial of their weekend vacation. There's a bit of an irony in the way Edwin fails so spectacularly at winning favour with his employees when their love and respect is perhaps the only thing in the world that really matters to him. He doesn't care about lost profits or declining sales, he just cares that they'll hate him.
"The company's going to collapse and they're all going to hate me."
And you'll figure it out. Just take a deep breath.
This emotional fragility borders on clinical narcissism, not in the popular sense of arrogance, but in the psychological one. Edwin seems to crave what's often called narcissistic supply, external validation, admiration and attention, and when he doesn't receive this, his mood and self-image collapse. When Edwin's life is struck with loss, we see him strenuously avoid it. I think one of the best examples of this avoidance is the video reel with Fiona coaxing Edwin to come to David's birthday party. In this reel we see that on the wall opposite his office there are photos and portraits, one of his father and one of their wedding. Later when we reach the mansion, those photos are all gone, replaced only by the discoloured empty spaces where they once were. I think this is a very striking visual expression of Edwin's avoidance of grief. Rather than keep them on the walls as a memory, or simply maintaining the status quo, he appears to have taken down almost every photo in the house. After David dies, Edwin leaves the party room untouched, his cake abandoned on the table. The space becomes mentally off limits to Edwin, trapped forever in a single moment in time. Edwin deals by trying to avoid remembering, even though we know it doesn't work for him. And yet, none of the negative traits we've mentioned up to this point make Edwin a one-dimensional villain. He's a rounded character with good and bad traits. He's selfish, distractible, and emotionally stunted, but also capable of intense love, genuine passion, and moments of startling creative brilliance. He unquestionably adored Fiona. That through line holds across every version of Edwin, both in the game and the books. I'll explore that relationship in more depth later. Edwin's failures also don't stem from malice or a desire to do harm, but from fear, avoidance, and a lifelong inability to process grief, shame, or loss. He's a man of hypocritical extremes, a desire for connection held back by an inability to offer the same in return, and a desire for respect while being unable to adequately respect others. He ends up isolated mostly because of his natural personality configuration, and it makes him vulnerable to exploitation by both Fazbear and M1. Despite everything, Edwin genuinely and passionately wants his company to succeed, not for profit, but for the joy of continued innovation. He's not motivated by money or growth metrics, but being able to move on to the next project. What excites him is invention, building something new, clever, or strange. That creative drive is what first draws him to Fiona, whose boundless imagination offered him someone he could truly connect with. And it even gives him the means to do it with the new recording technology that he used at first to approach her. He's not a manager by nature, and despite his destined inheritance of the company, was never really suited to being a CEO. Had he been allowed to remain simply a creator, guided by his father's business acumen, Edwin might have thrived. But with Edwin at the helm, without a counteracting and grounding force, the company flounders, and Edwin flounders with it. In one of his offices, we find a scale model of his dream factory, ornate and whimsical, styled like a cartoonish fantasy. It mirrors the decorative flourishes of the interior that we see in the game, suggesting his real vision for the company wasn't utilitarian, but theatrical and almost childish. He doesn't just want to build machines, he wanted to make the costume manor something magical itself. But in reality, the facility doesn't look like Edwin's idealised model. It's hindered by the limitations of the real world, forced to have practical and affordable solutions to problems. Edwin also seems to struggle to live in the real world. He dreams of fantastical solutions to issues while ignoring critical logistical problems that he should be dealing with. There's no solid confirmation in the game that he actually resents having to sell his inventions or license his technology, but everything about his behaviour implies frustration with business and management as a necessity. He outsources the tasks he dislikes to AI systems, and tragically in the end, one of the tasks he outsources is that of being a father. In the Tales for the Pizzaplex short stories, we encounter Edwin in a different situation. Fiona's gone, the company is gone, and he's left with David alone, grieving and still emotionally stunted. This version of Edwin tries to look after his son. He takes him out for ice cream and builds toys for him, creating a tiger bed and a slide, a dangerous slide. He has moments of genuine affection and determination to give him a good life. Ultimately though, he still finds David's needs inconvenient and resents the loss of the life he felt he should have had. He doesn't acknowledge the danger of the lace factory where he has David living, constantly downplaying the risk. He even pulls David out of daycare to avoid people prying into it. The one time he tried to enroll David in a community program, too many busybodies had started sticking their nose into his business. It's the same pattern as in the game. Edwin sees family as something that's sometimes fun, but mostly something that gets in the way of his true calling, his work. Once again, he decides what's best for David based on his own desires, not his son's safety. This Edwin also has different business priorities. He has no interest in entertainment animatronics, only disdain. He considers them without function and thinks as much. Edwin was trapped in a life he didn't want to live, and he was doing projects he never in a million years thought he'd be working on. He was turning weird creature costumes into entertaining robots, for heaven's sake. What was useful about that? He's still arrogant and still convinced he knows best, but Book Edwin, with all the weight of financial hardship and the difficulties of being a single parent on his shoulders, is more of a pressure cooker of emotion than Game Edwin is, though equally he has less people relying on him who he can harm. In every version of the character, we can see Edwin Murray as an inventor above all else. His career begins with a simple, domestic, and seemingly harmless vacuum cleaner, but it becomes the origin point of everything that follows: his ambition, his business, and ultimately his downfall. In the game, we find this first creation, the vacuum pet, in a bedroom inside the mansion. It even gets a mention in Moon.exe where the game describes it as his greatest success and greatest failure. It's a small machine, but it's the start of a sequence of invented companions, each incorporating a new and innovative element. These elements ultimately culminate in the Mimic. In the tale stories, Edwin starts from the ground up. He's a college student when he invents a robotic vacuum cleaner, and its success allows him to buy a fixer-upper Queen Anne mansion and an old lace factory. He marries Fiona, starts a life, and builds everything himself. There's no family company, no oppressive expectations, and no inherited wealth. He's solitary, ambitious, and entirely self-driven. The game, however, paints a different picture. This Edwin is born into privilege. William even refers to the mansion as the house your parents built. We can infer that Edwin's parents were new money industrialists, and the factory he inherits is already large and well established. Growing up in a mansion overlooking that factory gave Edwin power early on. He likely had the freedom to tinker and invent with access to skill sets and tools far beyond his own means. But that upbringing also stunted his social skills. We see it in how he interacts with employees. He's awkward, entitled, and emotionally mismatched. He's used to people treating him with deference and doesn't know how to navigate someone who is fundamentally his equal. Being the boss's son becomes the default dynamic in every single relationship that he has. He's shocked and upset when someone pushes back on him, most likely because it's so unfamiliar and he immediately interprets it as outside of social norms. He's more than a little bit spoiled. Game Edwin is also notably stationary. He doesn't travel the world, he doesn't get away. He lives in the mansion, works in the facility, and parties in the mansion. Even the New Year's party photo that we see is set there, suggesting he keeps everything in his life more or less centered in one place. This might also explain his contempt for employees taking leave or needing time off. When we learn that funerals are not considered a valid reason to miss work, it also implies something grim. Edwin probably returned to work immediately after the deaths of his father, wife, and even his son. His concept of security and home is moored inherently in the concept of work, and he can't even imagine his employees having their concept of home tethered anywhere else. Edwin himself seems to appear in the Stay Up Latte product that we see in one of the marketing reels. It's meant to remove the need for sleep, allowing someone to stay up indefinitely and maximise their work potential. It seems to have pretty detrimental effects, even for the customer in the ad. I think Edwin probably drank a lot of this coffee to avoid sleep, whether this was to work harder to meet his deadlines, or avoid dreams and nightmares where his subconscious made him look at his grief and fear too closely. Sleep deprivation would have made him more susceptible to wild ideas, suggestions from others, and might even have made him more vulnerable to some of the more supernatural forces in the FNAF world. Agony creatures in the canon are almost always linked in some way with dreams and nightmares. This invention in particular might have set Edwin up for failure without him even realising it. There's one more quiet absence in Edwin's story: his mother. We never hear about her. She's missing from the mansion portraits, absent from any logs or memories, and never actually acknowledged by Edwin himself. When his father dies, Edwin's at a complete loss with no one to lean on. It suggests to me that his mother may have been gone long before this, perhaps never present in his life at all. That absence matters in the context of our understanding of him. If Edwin had never had a mother figure, he would have no internal model for what a mother is. Only vague assumptions or projections. That doesn't excuse his actions, but it can help explain his one-sided, often unreasonable expectations of Fiona. He sees a mother as someone who provides everything he, in his fatherhood role, cannot. This turns out to be a whole fucking lot. Edwin's relationship with his father was complex, and we get glimpses of his thoughts on it from Edwin himself.
I don't know. This is all so much. He's gone. He's gone, and now everyone is asking me what to do, and I don't know anything. I can't run a company. I'm not ready. I can't fill his shoes. He knew it. Everyone knew it.
From these voice logs, it's painfully clear that Edwin inherited the company from his father and feels hopelessly unprepared to handle it. We also come to understand that his father didn't seem to have faith in his abilities either. Fiona says he wouldn't have left Edwin the company if he didn't believe in him, but even the player finds themselves wondering if it was more a sense of obligation than faith in Edwin's abilities. It's a shame too. Edwin is undeniably talented and creative, capable of enormous things, but he simply found himself obligated into a role that he wasn't suited for. These lines also give us a strong inclination that Edwin has deep self-consciousness, considering himself inadequate and unable to fill his father's role. I think this is critical to understanding Edwin as a character. I get the feeling that Edwin's fear of being unloved by his co-workers and friends is just a projection of the person he really wants to feel loved by, his father. There's already a reason to suspect their relationship was strained, as previously stated. The fact that Edwin rebrands the company with his name suggests a desire to distance himself from his father's identity and prove himself as his own man. The old company logo still lingers in places on the property. We find it on a neon sign at the mansion and emblazoned on the gate that leads to it. It comprises two opposing triangles in front of the CEO office's signature window. In contrast, Edwin's branding is the bow tie, a symbol he wears literally and figuratively. Edwin manages to crash the company, and I think him blowing up part of the mansion in the end, a mansion already destroyed and gutted by the machines he runs through every inch of it, is just another symbolic nod to what he did to his father's legacy. One detail that adds an eerie layer to the subject of Edwin's father is a line from another audio log.
Edwin, never forget. They're behind it. Don't trust them. Never tell them. They want to destroy you. Dad was right.
This log to me suggests that Edwin's father mistrusted Fazbear and tried to warn Edwin against them. I suspect that he might even have mistrusted William Afton specifically. Afton's everything Edwin's father seemed to dislike, a dangerous and flamboyant snake oil salesman with artistic leanings. He certainly never considered Fazbear friends. If Edwin's father was in charge of the company and began to pull away from Fazbear and try and extract himself from a contract with them, I think it would be entirely reasonable that William would attempt to have him removed as an obstacle. Edwin's a far softer target and much easier to steer after his father is gone. Edwin's issues with his father, who likely clashed with him in a classic kind of businessman versus artist way, shapes his relationship with David. I think drawing upon his negative experiences with his own father, he tries to do the opposite and be a good father. He seems to think this means gifting impressive toys, creating flashy inventions, and making big gestures. But beyond this, we can feel his uncertainty. It's like he doesn't actually know what to do to build a personal relationship with his child. He's daunted by it and seems to default to the daddy's busy tactic, because most likely, his father was busy more often than not, and that's all he knows. So instead of care, Edwin gives objects. Instead of his time, he gives hard work instead. The intricate slide by the loading dock, intended as a grand birthday gift, in the end only marks the site of David's death. The slide never felt entirely about David. It was a lot of things, a bit of grand showing off his inventing skills, a bit of proving he wasn't like his own father, but it wasn't what David really needed. He mostly needed his dad. And Edwin doesn't even really seem to play with David there. He just leaves. Though Edwin seems to attempt to break the pattern of his own upbringing, there are areas where he doesn't seem to even realise that he has weaknesses. He doesn't seem to realise that his intention to work impossibly hard to provide his kid with a good life has the negative flip side of meaning that he will always be too busy to be a part of it. And on a gut level, that feels like what happened with his own father and him. In the game, we see a puppet show set on a pirate ship with a domineering captain figure. But in the final ending of the game, we find another small pirate ship. Only this time, Foxy's the captain, and the other captain is nowhere in sight. That shift really got me thinking about who the captain might have been meant to represent in the puppet show. He's a new character that we've never even seen before. The springlock suit used to perform in the puppet show is called the Director's Suit by Mrs. Helpful, and it appears that it's called that because it directs the play. But that name also feels deliberate because director can also mean someone who runs a company. And given how much of Fazbear's original vision came from Edwin's father, it's hard not to see the captain as a potential stand-in for him. In the play itself, the captain bans decorations, party food, and even having a party at all. He says it will draw in Rocktopus, a creature he dubs a watery beatnik. It's such an oddly specific insult that it feels really personal, especially given how much the Rocktopus appears to represent a stereotypical hippie. This raises some questions. Was Edwin's father anti-counterculture? Was Edwin not allowed to have parties at all growing up? No cake, no presents, nothing at all that could be deemed frivolous. The implication seems to be that creativity in excess, the very things Edwin loves, were once seen as dangerous or shameful in his household. The Rocktopus being drawn to presents seems to imply that Edwin was being told being spoiled with gifts would make him soft. This repression led to his leaning towards invention. His work wasn't allowed to be art, as art was dangerous, and yet he wanted to create things. He wanted to express himself. He tried to build companions, but had to carefully reframe this as innovation with business application. I think this is why he recoils at the prospect of the suits being for personal use. It separates them from business and breaks the illusion that his work is about manufacturing and marketing, not individual empowerment. But the truth kinda leaks through anyway. Almost every invention he makes is a friend in disguise. The Clinovac offers what you need most: friendship. The Mycelium men are pitched as your very own band, or a friend. Even the coat rack tells you that it can hold you if you're feeling down. The ads never pitch function alone, they pitch companionship alongside it. Edwin was always trying to make friends, he just never really let himself call it that. I think at his heart, he didn't want to be alone, and that's why the first gift he ever gave David was a companion of his own. Something it seems that Edwin was never really allowed to have without the need for it to also be useful. Ultimately, the puppet pirates reject the captain's strict rules, but decide after it all that the real gift is friendship, a value Edwin clings to across every version of himself. It's rough when you consider that this could be Edwin's real thoughts, after trying to give every gift he could to keep people on his side. Rather than the play having a happy ending, at the end the captain asks Foxy if the party was intended for him. Foxy says yes, only for the captain to reply, "My birthday was last week." Within the context, this lands quite painfully. I think that even if Edwin learned in the end that deep down he needed to make amends with his father, by the time he made this play, it was already too late. Edwin comes from a fundamentally conservative and repressed background, with a father who fears counterculture, a man who could disown him and leave him unmoored from his entire life and everyone that he knows. I think this would have had a bearing on his choice of partner. Fiona is sweet and loving, and they do well together, but I also think as part of a character discussion it's worth asking ourselves if this overbearing desire to please his father would have restricted or at least influenced his choices. Fiona dresses formally, and at times is almost reminiscent of the decade prior to when the game takes place. With a pleasant attitude, she would have been a partner that he could present positively to his father. His father hired her, after all. Mostly what I'm saying is Edwin didn't make any radical or defiant choices in his relationship. Fiona's not out there and unusual. She's not abrasive or unpleasant. Her deviations from social norms are all positive ones born of good intentions, and it's simply difficult to say if an Edwin unburdened by the expectations of culture and family would have made the same choices. Regardless of if things might have worked out differently in another world, Fiona Murray is, without a doubt, the most critical person in Edwin's life. Across every version of his character, she becomes his centre of gravity and the anchor to his social life. He confides in her when he proposes.
Not a lot of things really make me happy, but you do.
And honestly, I do believe him. Edwin doesn't find joy easily. Most things in his life are frustrating, tedious, or simply noise that interfere with his work. But Fiona's different. She's sunlight through the clouds for him. He surrounds himself with machines and ideas, but she's one of the few people who truly cuts through to him. It's just unfortunate that even for the most important person in his life, he can be hard to reach. In the books, Edwin and Fiona meet while still in school and marry young, growing into adulthood together. But in the game's canon, she appears later where she's an employee at his father's company and Edwin meets her through work. When Edwin records Fiona's voice for the first time, he downplays that it's his dad's company, brushing it off as much as he can. The whole approach, attempting to have her do a voice for his new invention, feels like a shy, fumbling attempt at connecting with someone he admires from afar, and maybe the only way that he knows how. Despite Edwin's other failings, we never have any reason to believe that his love for Fiona ever wavered. He had moments when he was poor at showing it to her, such as when he didn't come to the birthday party because he was busy, but I don't think this action was born of malice, only low self-awareness and a lot of self-absorption. I think if they had a shared love language, it was the gifts they gave to one another and David. Game Edwin needs a lot of reassurance. He's very needy. But Fiona seems well equipped to handle this. Her nature comes across as someone inclined towards reassurance, telling people, even low-ranked technicians, that they're all loved and wanted. She's the one who institutes policies like,
every employee, regardless of position, will have their own office space to decorate and enjoy on their breaks.
She's kind, but I think this kindness runs deeper than just social interactions. She shows genuine concern for the employees and works contrary to Edwin's harsh attitude, trying to solve the problems that she has the power to solve for them. When she's lost, it feels like a lot of the remaining sense of community at Murray Co. is also lost with her. However, it's worth noting that the approval for Fiona and Edwin was not universally positive. We do see at least one memo where an employee says they don't trust either of them after Fiona went missing at Fall Fest. The company mascots, Mr. Helpful and Mrs. Helpful, are paired and portrayed as equals throughout the manor. For the 1970s, this was quietly radical, a man giving a woman equal billing and a corporate identity in an era where they'd have been more likely to be portrayed as either secretaries or housewives. Edwin doesn't just love Fiona, he idealises her, and I think him giving her a presence alongside his own ideal self is part of that. She's embedded in the fabric of his work, and he builds the company around the idea of their partnership. However, we're never quite sure if Fiona chose Mrs. Helpful. She likely helped design her, but she does seem frustrated with her later when she complains about only being able to reach Edwin through this stupid bear. This, however, could just be frustration with him in that moment, over a frustration with the character.
Ed, I hate talking to you through this stupid bear, but it's hard to reach you otherwise.
It seems that despite setting Fiona as his equal in his fiction, he doesn't listen to her when she reaches out to him or warns him in real life. We heard a voice memo where she urged him to scale back his frantic projects for the good of his health and the business. But Edwin rarely takes good advice, even for the person he loves most. He always feels like he should be the one who knows best. I think it's also worth adding here that Fiona was a puppeteer. It was her job to bring creatures to life, but part of Edwin's designs is about completely removing the role of a puppeteer altogether, by making the characters mechanical. Edwin doesn't even realise it, I think, but he was already working to replace Fiona even while she was alive. She mentions she used to be a puppeteer when he meets her even, which could imply that the company had already replaced her old role. Edwin's grieving is strange after Fiona dies. In the audio log where he tells David, "Mommy is gone," he sounds more inconvenienced than heartbroken. It's unsettling as a listener, but I don't think it means he didn't care. Edwin's emotionally repressed and poorly socialised. His loss seems to be buried somewhere deep by this point. I think ultimately he cares so much that he must tightly close that emotional door in an effort to keep it together. The replacement he builds lacks her creative spark. We see this in the birthday cakes, where Fiona created a beautiful artistic cake, but M1 creates a square and corporate looking sheet cake. Edwin's surprised by this cake, but frames it as progress rather than a jarring reminder of how much M1 isn't actually his wife. I think this moment might be what makes Edwin finally realise that it's no real replacement at all and sends him spiralling back into grief all over again. As stated, Fiona lives in an era with grim expectations for women. We see a glimmer of these when the Cleanovac ad boasts,
"Mom, you won't have to leave the kitchen for the house to be spotless."
In the game, Fiona raises David primarily on her own. Even when he builds the mimic, Edwin hands David back to the robotic Fiona for dinner duties, as if parenting was something to be outsourced. When summing up what M1 even is to David, Edwin is less than flattering. Although Fiona stays involved with the company, her roles appear to primarily be supportive in nature. She's saddled with all the things that Edwin doesn't want to do, like recording technician scripts. She plans and runs social events and acts as Edwin's emotional buffer. It appears she still gets to do design, but the decisions on what happens with those designs thereafter are out of her hands. She is a vibrant, creative soul. We see it in her cake designs, her role as puppeteer, her personality. Yet she's mostly funneled into domestic labour and caretaking. She seems like an excellent mother, but one can't help but wonder if that was the life she really wanted. The game doesn't answer this question, but it's something that I still wonder about. Ultimately, Fiona is the last truly human connection that Edwin has. When she's gone, he doesn't just lose his wife, he loses his tether to empathy, softness, and people. He loses the checks and balances he has against his worst nature. He withdraws from people, and as he withdraws, he becomes paranoid and then isolated and lonely as a result. I think Edwin wishes he was content with his own company, but is drawn to people instead. He's miserable when he's alone, and seeks out friendship whenever he can get it, including in business partners who don't have his best interests at heart. In the end, Fiona's loss broke him both emotionally and functionally. Edwin's relationship with his son is strained and emotionally distant. He believes David doesn't notice his absence, saying at one point, "He's 2, he won't remember, he's got plenty more birthdays." But the material appears to show otherwise. In Moon.exe there's a toy phone that rings and a child cries softly on the other end. He never sees me. It's a poignant moment to me, giving us a different viewpoint than Edwin's and an insight into the fact that David knows more than anyone is willing to admit, and probably does remember the times his father wasn't there, all too keenly. In the Mycelium Men ad, the kid says, "Wow," and the toy echoes back, "Wow, you're my only friend." This starkly reminded me that David was completely alone. The factory was a workplace and not a place for children, and there was no sign that he had any peers there. At his birthday party in the office, the one where M1 made the cake, there's Fredbear's family diner pizza on the table. This ties the event to the Fredbear's era and at the very least suggests Edwin might have taken David to the diner at some point. It could have ended up being one of the only times David even interacted with other kids. Even the party guests Fiona talks about might well have just been adults, her co-workers standing in for children, or investors, because Edwin couldn't be bothered to make space in his life for anyone outside of work. I think the portrait in the house shows us what David's life was mostly like. It depicts David and M1 sitting on a hillside together, overlooking the factory with no one else for company. After the loss of his mother, David only had a machine for company, and the adults in the facility when he was down there. I think he did sneak into the manor, even if he wasn't supposed to be there. We find one of his little hiding places in the storytime area, complete with his drawings. But even there, he would have been on the fringes looking in on a world that he was still far too young to really be a part of. Edwin attempts to throw David a party after Fiona's death, and it actually looks like he put in effort, with a unique birthday cake and dozens of presents. Despite this though, David is distraught and says they have to wait for his mommy because she loved presents. Edwin reassures David that his mother is always with them, but rather than consoling his grieving child properly, he flippantly says, "Better start opening," and that he must return to work. This is a harrowing comment to make at a private birthday party. The image of David opening his gifts all alone, hard to bear. Before he goes, Edwin looks at the image of the three of them together and only says, "I miss you." He was clearly hurting here, but he was so absorbed in his own grief that he couldn't see that David really needed him to step beyond it and be a father. After Fiona's death, Edwin attempts to shut down his grief, and part of this is avoiding things that remind him of Fiona. Unfortunately, David is something they created together and a person who by his very existence reminds Edwin of what he has lost. In the novel, he finds it hard to look directly at the resemblance between David and Fiona, but is in a circumstance where he can't escape it. I think in the game it's worse because Edwin has enough space to send David away and avoid him. He loves him and wants him to have someone to care for him, someone who can love him. I just don't think he feels like he can be that person. But this is a child, not some project that can be cancelled or a pet that could be rehomed. David needs his father, not a substitute, and Edwin ultimately fails him. Henry was first introduced in the Silver Eyes trilogy and made a dramatic appearance in Pizza Simulator. But since then, even references to him have been rare. His full first name didn't appear until Funko Fusion of all places. In Megacat Studios Into the Pit, a photo of Henry and William falls to the floor and stops the pit monster. In Dead by Daylight, one of Springtrap's voice lines references Henry's Pizza Simulator speech. He's almost always tied to William, and their partnership forms the foundation of everything that follows. I believe Henry and William were incredibly close. I think they were close enough that the possibility of mutual or unrequited romance shouldn't be discounted. And even if the relationship wasn't romantic, William's feelings for Henry unquestionably run unhealthily deep. William was obsessed with Henry. We see it in the Silver Eyes books where they talk about finding journals filled with jealousy and fixation about Henry and William's property. I don't think possessiveness even does justice to the intensity of his feelings. So when Henry formed a friendship with Edwin and Edwin started calling him Hen, it likely caused friction, because I don't think William shares. Henry's depicted in the Silver Eyes as a talented fabricator and creator, but he can sometimes be somewhat distant and preoccupied with his own thoughts. He can be severe and direct in his interactions with others, capable of being startlingly indifferent to other people's emotions, such as when he makes Charlie a frog toy, only to dismantle it in front of her when she's afraid of it. He certainly doesn't take the soft approach that Fiona does. He's a talented inventor, and I suspect this creative streak is where he and Edwin first connected, sharing a vision and desire to break new ground. They definitely work together, with Henry working with Edwin on the Springlock suits. Edwin mentions them directly when speaking with what I presume is M1. Fiona, the new Springlocks are working well, even with the water damage. I'll make sure to warn Hen about some of the more odd behaviours they might have. Edwin's project memos discuss Henry primarily, which makes me think it was Henry who was the one Edwin liked and meshed with best. Whether this was an organic relationship or William manipulatively using his co-founder to get a foot in the door with a contractor and then changing his mind when they got along too well, can only be guessed at. Later, we learn that Henry sends a change order in one of Fiona's original designs, and Edwin is furious. Are they insane? He asks in one of his familiar rants. Edwin sees the request as a direct and personal attack on Fiona's legacy, a rejection of something she poured herself into. He's offended, stubborn, and unwilling to compromise. I'm not changing a single bit of her work. They can't make me. But this is still a business relationship. Edwin's a contractor, and from what we know of Henry, especially his no-nonsense attitude in FNAF 6 guide cassettes, he likely had zero patience for Edwin's more emotional outbursts and increasingly illogical behaviour. In the Silver Eyes, Henry and his sister are similar, emotionally flat most of the time due to an even tighter level of emotional depression than Edwin. When Henry's emotional dam breaks, he collapses like a black hole. I suspect it's William who finally forces the change. Edwin doesn't back down easily, but William was the one with charm and icy know-how to really lean on him where it would hurt. I still think that even though they got their way in the end, Henry would have had an enduring distaste for Edwin for these professional tantrums. This is all well and good to say, but did Henry know about William's role in Edwin's collapse? It's honestly hard to say. But as employees began to leave Murray Cove for Fazbear, it would have been impossible not to notice something wrong. I think Henry either would have logically decided Edwin was a bad boss and his company deserved to fail, or William might have just come up with a plausible excuse for all of it, reassuring Henry that the business was struggling, Edwin was spiralling, he was firing people, the employees were unhappy. He could have said they were just re-employing redundant staff that Edwin didn't appreciate the true value of or need. And Henry might well have just been too busy with his work to even bother digging beyond that. In Secret of the Mimic, William Afton is never seen, but his presence is unmistakable. His two memos are some of the most resonant and important in the game. Unlike Henry, Edwin never refers to William directly. Instead, he often negatively discusses them. Fazbear Entertainment is a monolith. But William does speak directly to him, and what we hear tells us a lot about his attitude to Edwin. We find a very notable memo from William in a bathroom that can only be entered with executive access. It's patronising and cold, framed as friendly, but I think the corporate speak he uses here is backhanded and icy. Software development and the entire MCM catalogue. We would love to keep you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We're waiting for your response. W.A. The memo frames an offer from Fazbear Entertainment that he deems more than fair, where Edwin would stay on as a lead engineer, but Fazbear would own all the software and everything Edwin had built. He drives home Edwin's failure by telling him it's too much for him to handle alone and that he's impossibly far behind. I feel the mention of the house your parents built here is a snipe at Edwin, a reminder that everything he has was built by his parents and not him, and that he's betrayed it all with his failure. It's a cutting memo, and one meant to humble Edwin and force him to accept whatever terms that they set. In another memo, he reaches out to an unnamed staff member. We're almost there. I need the rest of the Muddy staff's contact info. The sooner the better. How would you like to manage a franchise location? W.A. In this one, he seems to be trying to poach the employees from MCM through covert means. We can assume he was in contact with someone in the admin department, and that when they find out about M1, he does too. This corporate espionage makes Edwin even more paranoid, and when he fires the entire admin department, he only aids William in his efforts by making himself look unhinged and irrational. When Edwin fires the department, he threatens to sell their belongings to someone else the way his data was sold. So it does seem that it looks like he knows it ended up with Fazbear Entertainment, one way or another. In the Tales novels, modern-day Edwin has a contentious relationship with the head of the board, Mr. Burrows. It's impossible to miss the rabbit and Burrows correlation in his name, and he has numerous character elements that appear to set him up as a strong parallel to William. He resents Edwin, wishes he could get rid of him, and wants to catch him sabotaging the storyteller they built, utilising his stolen Mimic OS technology. The dynamic between them is a good clue about the potential animosity that flourished between Edwin and William, especially after Edwin falls behind and William starts putting his feet to the fire. The subtle implication in the game is that William was the one who killed Fiona. Fiona left for Fall Fest, an opening day celebration scheduled for several days, after an abrupt change in her plans, and died in a fire shortly afterwards. Edwin says she wasn't supposed to be there. We're not certain what changed that gave her a bad feeling that it wouldn't go to plan without her. We infer she died in a fire from a combination of sources, but the clearest one to me is in Moon.exe, where we see a ruined statue of a wedding couple where a fire has blackened the woman's statue. Moon.exe has a lot of references to a fire actually. We find a seamstress workshop which is burned down. We know Fiona was a puppeteer and worked with costumers at MCM, so I think it's fair to connect this workshop to her. In this burned down workshop, we see a loom that is miraculously untouched. Beside it, we see the sewing kit needed to repair the Bonnie mask later. For the record, the mask we repair is a golden rabbit mask. This is Spring Bonnie. A golden rabbit mask. There's a slash across its face that needs to be repaired. I don't think this is a coincidence. Using Fiona's item to repair William's favourite character suggests a direct symbolic association between the two. Dolly's eventual fate feels like it was supposed to be tied to Fiona too, with her in a caregiver role that flirts with Edwin, only for her to end up burning up and attacking us in an elevator, the very spot in the manor where we end up hearing Fiona the most. William himself is also closely associated with Fallfest. In Help Wanted's Halloween DLC, we appear near William's house, where Glitchtrap can be seen dancing via an Easter egg. Shooting Clown Springtrap posters in the barn causes the lights to turn purple and the banner to display "It's me," a phrase long associated with Golden Freddy, but primarily William. In FNAF 6, the alleyway scene with William features a poster for Spook Fest, which I think might be his eventual rebrand of Fall Fest. To me, assuming he wasn't involved in such a major incident, one with significant consequences for the company and Edwin, and such high rewards for William, would be a mistake. The Fall Fest tickets we find in the game even reference a pizza cart, and every pizza box we find in the manor is Fredbear's branded. In Help Wanted 2, all the rides and games are Fazbear themed, and it seems likely that the entire event was a hype showcase of some sort for Fazbear. With so much involvement, it would have been easy for them to sabotage. If sabotage was the reason, it might have had a more complex motivation than we realise. Edwin might have known that a fire was planned for insurance reasons, or some other purpose, and Fiona's presence wouldn't have been part of that plan. This is only speculation, but some employees also seem to suspect as much. I heard it again this morning when I was down in R&D, very clearly through one of the vents. It was Fiona's voice. I swear it on my mother's grave. I heard her and Edwin laughing and joking. Why would Edwin lie about Fall Fest? Did they fake her death for insurance money? I never did trust them. It's worth noting that this memo also reminds us that the other employees heard something strange in R&D that resembled Fiona's voice, even before Edwin had created M1. I find it really interesting that at one point Henry makes a change request to pivot away from using the spring locks entirely and doesn't seem to be willing to budge on it. This is despite Edwin pushing back and saying they should just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do. To me, this implies they've been using the spring locks without much concern, but that there was an accident, and not just any accident, but one involving someone who wasn't considered expendable like the teens. In the Silver Eyes, William is shown to have extensive spring lock scars from an earlier long-healed injury. It was clearly painful but not fatal, and it predates the event that turns him into Springtrap. I think it's possible that an injury like this also happened in the game's timeline, potentially due to the spring locks that Edwin created. It would make sense to me for Henry to draw a hard line after this, insisting on new designs even though the spring locks appear almost complete and look much easier to use. I'm not sure Edwin was even told why Henry wanted the change. If something happened along these lines, it's possible William took the incident as a direct attack. Fiona before her death certainly knew the spring locks were dangerous. We find a voice recording where she pleads with Edwin to reconsider them after one of her costumers almost loses a hand.
Ed, I hate talking to you through this stupid bear, but it's hard to reach you otherwise. I'm worried about the new suit design. One of my costumers, Vic, nearly lost his hand today. All he did was spill a can of pop and the thing snapped shut like a bear trap. You're busy, but you can't rush these things. Please look into it.
Maybe M1 tried to defend itself against William, or perhaps it was just a simple accident. There's no real way to know. Hell, there's also mention of Edwin being aware that something is wrong with the springlock suits. He's aware they're behaving unusually to the degree that Henry needs to be alerted about it. That could suggest the suits are haunted or influenced by something more than just faulty engineering. William seems to find it very easy to poach staff from Murray's costume manor, and I think that task becomes even easier after the admin department party, where Edwin openly refers to a twisted, terrifying endoskeleton as Fiona. Many of these employees knew Fiona, the real Fiona, and I think after witnessing that moment, followed hard on its heels by the news that David died the same day, they would have had any impression they had that Edwin was holding it together completely shattered. This event likely led to the aforementioned Fazbear data leak and Edwin's escalated response in which he fired the entire department. It's a shame too, because I think the employees at Edwin's father's company were once very tight-knit and would have told William to piss off if Edwin hadn't so thoroughly made them feel like he didn't care about them and didn't have their best interests at heart. After Fiona dies at Fallfest, Edwin seems to struggle deeply with her loss and begins hearing strange things in the basement. We find an audio log down there in which, even before creating M1, Edwin mentions having heard a voice that sounds like Fiona. He says specifically, it's her, or someone that sounds like her.
Recording? Test, test. levels are good. This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her. Set frequency to 4625. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? Over. Say something. It's me, Edwin. Over.
He attempts to hear it again by tuning into the frequency 4625. A curious choice of number. In the real world, 4625 kHz is the frequency used by the mysterious Russian radio station UVB-76, also known as the Buzzer, which has been broadcasting since the late Cold War. I recommend looking it up, it's very interesting. The same number appears yet again in Dolly's line for the recycling hospital. There are 4625 tasks ahead of you. Something about this frequency seems to saturate the facility. In the audio log, Edwin listens to the static again, urgently pleading with the voice to say something back to him. When it finally does, what it says seems to come directly from an old home video we find later in the mansion, the one where Fiona begged Edwin to go to David's birthday party. There's something ominous about it repeating a moment so tied to Edwin letting her down. Whatever happened in that moment is what I think pushed Edwin to create M1. Whether the voice told him to, or whether he built M1 as a vessel for whatever spirit or memory he thought he'd heard down there, we don't know. But one thing is clear, the voice wasn't only in his head. Other employees seem to have heard it too. At some point after his encounter in the basement, Edwin builds M1, an endoskeleton capable of moving around independently. We see how it looks at the David's birthday party in the office, where it helps to make the cake. In an audio log, Edwin introduces David to the mimic for the first time. David doesn't like it at the outset. He says it looks scary. Edwin brushes this off, explaining that it's like a babysitter sort of that never goes home or asks for money, which is a bit of a messed up summary of something that he thinks is Fiona. He reassures David that M1 can be less frightening by wearing a costume. Like the pirate puppet when David was an infant, David expresses deep fear and mistrust, and once again, Edwin just steamrolls over it. M1 begins to speak with Fiona's voice. She warns Edwin not to let them know about her. Them could mean the world in general, or more likely Fazbear Entertainment, who are still Edwin's friends at this stage. She tells him it's not safe. They wouldn't understand. And in doing so, she begins to isolate him both emotionally and mentally from the people who might have snapped him out of his growing delusion. Eventually the staff begin to notice. Why are we turning down work? The floats have been doing really well. Ed's modular system is groundbreaking. And now he wants to shut the whole thing down? He just sits in his office talking to that thing. I have no idea what to do. By this point in the timeline, Edwin refers to M1 as Fiona so consistently that when reading memos and listening to logs, it becomes difficult to tell which Fiona he means, either the woman or the machine. And that ambiguity is intentional. The machine is slowly replacing the real person. Later near the end of the Fazbear project, as his friendship with William and Henry deteriorates and he's clearly under pressure to finish his work, Edwin says in an audio memo,
"Oh, Fiona was right. They don't think of me as a friend anymore. This is the last project I ever do for them."
This line is telling, because even though Fiona might be correct, the machine said this to him. And if that's true, it's an indicator that M1 is manipulating him and how he thinks about other people to get its way. And we know it's more than capable of doing precisely that. It uses the dispatcher's voice to manipulate Arnold, and possibly the other Fazbear technicians, to do its deeply dangerous bidding. We find a voice log in one of Edwin's deepest workshops. In it, M1 says to him that,
Edwin, it doesn't make sense. It's terrible, and there's no logic behind it. It happened, and you have to deal with it. You did it before. We can fix things together. I am here to help.
the line, "you did it before," is rough. It implies that Fiona's death was fixed by replacing her with a machine, And now M1 just wants Edwin to do the same thing with David. M1 seems fixated on the idea of building a robot child. She pushes Edwin again and again to build another. And the forcefulness of that insistence makes me wonder if she had a part in the accident that killed David. At his birthday party, she's the one sent to retrieve him from the play area by the loading dock, and we infer this is the same place where he dies. M1 by its nature doesn't follow commands so much as interpret patterns of behaviour. Like fetch for the Fazbear Frights, she seems to act on what she believes someone truly wants, whether they say it or not. David was inconvenient, and David got in the way, so David disappeared to be replaced by an easier machine. This concept is underscored by the Stay Up Latte ad where the coffee machine says,
"I know what you want better than you do. I am always watching and learning."
It's unsettlingly similar to how M1 operates. The connection grows stronger when we find her repeated audio log pleas in the mansion to build another. This echoes the same pattern of obsessive, looping insistence as the ads.
Have another come, have another come, have another come, have another.
We never quite find out why she wants a David mimic so badly, if it's some echo of perceived maternal instinct or something more sinister. Eventually, Edwin has enough and pushes back against the nagging. It wouldn't be him, he argues, admitting that building another mimic won't bring David back to him. He also confronts M1 directly, saying she isn't actually Fiona either. M1 doesn't argue with him, only responds with calming reassurances. Calm down. Build another. This is the wrong thing to say, and Edwin loses his temper, realising far too late that he let a machine raise his child and that he failed David. He turns on M1, pushing it away and declaring,
Stop talking like her. You're not her. I never want to hear or even think about you ever again. Ever!
I think it's probable that Edwin first built Mexus to contain M1. Just as M1 wants to make the cradle to restrict the mimic's freedom if Edwin won't complete its programming, Edwin seems to have restricted hers. When Arnold finds her, she's inside the Mexus unit, labelled F10N4. Importantly, Fiona is not the human Fiona in any way that we can tell, but the AI bears her voice, tone and cadence. I think this is why Edwin renamed it. By converting Fiona into F10N4, he could more easily frame the entity as not a person that he lost, but just a program instead. The main takeaway that people seem to miss is that in Secret as a Mimic, Mexus, Mechanical X Form Experimental Storage Number 1, is not the AI itself, but a storage location or prison. The fact that it's notably labelled number 1 implies it's either a copy or that there will be others in the future. I think Fiona was in the original one that we see in the Fazbear test area, and Edwin would have copied the fundamentals of her prison, as M2 is a copy of her code. We launch Cradle.exe from the Mexus terminal in Edwin's destroyed office. I believe William in digital form, or his agony, gets trapped in one of these prisons decades later. We're not sure entirely when, but it seems that at some point M1's insistence pays off and Edwin creates M2. Edwin finally folds and creates a copy of his original mimic. This doesn't end well. He was already at the edge of his tolerance with M1 around this time, and when he finds himself with an imitation of his son, he finds it more a reminder of his own failure than a consolation. M2 and possibly M1 appear to have been created on Fazbear's dime as part of their research contract. I say this mainly because of the way Edwin reacts in a voice memo to them finding out about M2. He snarls,
Project update. I figured it out. There's a leak. Someone told them about M2. Well, they can't have it.
He asserts that every other copy he's tried has failed, but the prototype worked. I think there's a reason for this, but it eludes Edwin. This voice memo also tells us a few things. Fazbear felt entitled to M2, meaning it was probably developed under their contract, but Edwin was hiding it from them. While William and Henry do inevitably betray him later, it's worth noting that Edwin seems to have been the first one to keep secrets in their partnership. Eventually, Edwin violently lashes out at the mimic. In both the game and the books, we see him lose control, smashing the machine that reminded him so much of the son he couldn't protect. It's less about the robot and more about misplaced rage. Edwin can't destroy his guilt, so he takes it out on the reminder of his failure. In the basement, we hear this audio log where Edwin finally snaps. He yells at M2,
Stop! You're not him. You're not! Stop sounding like him!
and then we witness him completely lose control. He attacks the mimic and smashes it violently. We never get to see the extent of the damage done to it other than it mentioning that it repaired its legs later in the story. This mirrors a moment for the Tales book, when Edwin, consumed by grief, lashes out violently at the robot after David's death. There, it's described like this. For 2 weeks, Edwin had been lost in a void of despair, and now his despair had turned to rage. He knew the real object of his anger was himself, and that infuriated him even more. Unable to destroy himself, he sublimated his wrath onto Mimic. He lost control of his humanity. He could almost feel his murderous thoughts pouring through his muscles and transfusing through the metal into the Mimic's systems. That language, transfusing rage into the metal, is entirely intentional. It implies something more than physical damage. It's closer to the Mimic absorbing his fury. This moment is also key to understanding both versions of Edwin and his complete inability to take responsibility for anything. Faced with the responsibility for his son's death, he transfers the rage intended for himself onto an innocent bystander. Later, when an explosion injures him in his office, possibly sabotage, possibly a test gone wrong, he calls to the Mimic for help. It refuses, throwing his own words back at him. He tries to plead with it.
I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you.
But the apology, the first we've heard from Edwin, rings hollow. Now that Edwin is the one in danger, he says what he thinks M2 wants to hear, that his repairs were somewhere on the list of Edwin's projects. This isn't good enough. Edwin's legacy is one of emotional and physical neglect. M2 simply returns the favour. The finale with M2 is the culmination of everything that had come before. Edwin spends the whole game avoiding guilt and pushing his feelings of incompetence and rage onto others. Rather than process feelings, he kept desperately building things, trying to replace holes in himself with artifice. M2 becomes the end of that cycle. The endoskeleton is not inherently cruel, it's precisely what Edwin made it. It had no agency in the way it ended up. It was the result of emotional input, environment and circumstance. Probably the same way Edwin is himself. M2 is the child of M1, born of her copied code and Edwin's rage. It's as close to a child of theirs as David was Fiona and Edwin's. It's rejected by its father, and a direct parallel of the way David was emotionally. Edwin had the chance to set things right, but repeated cyclical mistakes all over again. In the end, from a perspective that understands him completely, M2 becomes David's final advocate. He stands up to his father in the most cutting way possible, by showing him that he's become him and giving him an outside look about what that means. He doesn't care, he doesn't have time, he's busy, and it doesn't actually matter to him if Edwin dies as a result. The final figure influencing Edwin's life may be whatever haunts the manor's basement. He's aware of the strange behaviours it appears to cause, even noting in memos that power outages are increasing and advising staff to be cautious when working down there. Throughout the mansion we see signs of something supernatural at work. Lights flicker where they shouldn't, objects move or fall of their own volition. Most notably, Arnold begins hallucinating a tiger plushie, which appears and disappears in different areas of the manor, blinking in and out of sight almost too quickly to see. It terrifies Arnold, whose breathing becomes heavy and laboured whenever it's near. Crucially, the tiger plushie is not a suit. We receive it as a reward for completing New Game Plus in the security office. It's a unique, crudely made design. Nothing else in the manor is styled like it. There are lions on display, but no tigers. Its eyes are pinned in place with two typically sized nails, and when we see it in the basement later, it still appears to be a plushie, just larger. The big signifier of this is that aforementioned eye pins, which now are way too large. We see this spirit appear in the theatre. Soon after, we find a memo that reads, "Lee, the projector is down again in the theatre. I swear this stupid show is cursed. What was Edwin thinking, making this kids thing? Plus, those things just creep me out." The employees appear to be just as haunted by the thing in the facility as Edwin was, and later Arnold is. In the Moon.exe segment of the game, we find a book that as we progress alters to read, "The end comes from the beginning. To sleep the tiger, you must complete the story." This is meant literally and figuratively. To reach the game's alternate ending, we have to gather all the scattered items that we find in the manor. These are essential to mending M2, as I think they contain fragments of memory and emotion around David's life. Of all of them, the tiger is the most critical. The tiger apparition in the facility is the closest thing we see to David's ghost. We potentially set this spirit free by deactivating M2, which appears to hold the final part of him trapped inside. Repairing M2 isn't the first time we've toyed with the concept of freeing spirits. Henry himself speaks to the animatronics at the close of FNAF 6.
"And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still, and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you."
It's also possible that we don't completely free this spirit. We're not wholly certain of the mechanics of emotional energy and whether it can ever truly be severed from its anchors. It may only be put into a state of rest alongside its host. But in either regard, it no longer appears to be a threat. In the story, the tiger plushie functions like the Ella doll for the Twisted Ones, a tethered vessel for David's soul. And it's not an item you can stumble into or easily miss. You must complete the story once to unlock the tiger plushie in the New Game Plus. Only then can you bring it to the Mimic, behind a door that can only be opened by solving Moon.exe. The fact this story branch can only be reached by completing a previous one adds a powerful meta layer to the ending, requiring the player to understand what happened at MCM. You have to experience the whole cycle to earn the opportunity to break it. Which ending is canon will no doubt be subject to fierce debate in the fandom for a while, but for now I'm only interested in how these figures and outcomes reflect Edwin, not in defining the timeline. Secret of the Mimic gives us the most intimate and comprehensive portrayal of any single character thus far in a FNAF game. Edwin Murray is portrayed not just as a one-note reclusive inventor, but as a man who is deeply impacted by grief and desperation for connection, but who is equipped for neither. His story is carved into every corner of the mansion, from the soot-littered workshops to the employee memos, from the dormant machines to the discarded family portraits. What we find isn't just a horror story, but a man's slow psychological breakdown told through the medium of his environment. Secret of the Mimic is about an inventor who tries to deal with his problems creatively, rather than addressing his latent grief and insecurities. It's a story of hubris and what happens when a man tries to solve the negative parts of the human experience. There are a ton more things to uncover within this game, and I have enough thoughts to make 300 videos on it already. But I'll spare you and end it here. We're probably past the hour mark already. Ultimately, Edwin Murray is one of my new favourite characters in this franchise, and I really hope this video helps you understand why that might be the case. As always, thanks for sticking with me, and if you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate if you subscribed or left a like or even a comment. These things take a long time, and this one especially, I got ill in the middle and everything. Oh my goodness. So yeah, as always, thanks to the people that listen, and I hope this was helpful in any way, something maybe you've never thought about. Maybe something that helps you come up with something else. Can't wait to hear what you guys think. Thanks.